Can you hear me now? Okay. Good afternoon. My name is Amy Hickel. I'm a teacher and administrator from Los Angeles, and I'm the curator of the exhibit, If I Have Seen Farther, It Is by Standing on the Shoulders of Giants, the Pedagogy of Father Luigi Giussani. In our exhibit, we look into the heart of Giussani's experience of what it is to truly educate. And to help us understand this today and to delve into the incredible richness of Father Giussani's approach to education, we have the help of Carmine Di Martino. He's a professor of philosophy at the State University of Milan, and he's reflected and written on this topic extensively, including many articles and books. He was a student of Father Giussani's and also a friend, and he was most recently the editor of 3 books that came out in Italy, one on Giussani and philosophy, Giussani and theology, and Giussani and education. We're very grateful that he came all the way from Italy to help us with this topic, so we welcome Dima.
The light, please. Okay, thank you. The title first. Christianity as an event. The educational proposal of Father Luigi Giussani. 5 points. First point. Education and the method. Luigi Giussani is rightly considered one of the greatest educators of the 20th century. The outcomes of his educational efforts have gained him universal recognition and have garnered attention around his personality. The young Giussani was well on his way toward an academic career in theology, but particular events in his life led him to an abrupt change of direction. In the early 1950s, while he was still fully engaged in academic research, thanks to many and meaningful conversations, he clearly realized that in so-called Catholic Italy, a profound gap between the youth and faith had opened up. Those who still attended the church groups and parishes were displaying a great fragility in their conviction and an almost complete lack of enthusiasm. Giussani became persuaded that at the root of that gap lay a lack at the level of education, and that such lack coincided with a lack of method. Therefore, he strongly felt the urgency to go and encounter the youth in the environment in which they primarily lived, that is the school, and made up his mind to leave academia. Within a few years, a great movement of people took shape around him, which later spread to other Italian cities, and a few decades later to other countries as well. The fact that we are here today is a living witness to the lasting fruitfulness of that beginning. Throughout his life, Father Giussani continually comes back to the problem of education and its method. For him, is a crucial problem for various reasons that I will try to explain. His interest and reflection on education, however, are not the outcome of an academic research in pedagogy, but they are born out of the desire to propose the Christian experience in an integral way so that it could appear without reductions to its contemporaries, and especially the youth, so that their reason could discern it, and their freedom welcome it. He does develop his original insights in the field of education, both pedagogically and psychologically, but they are primarily the development of a burning missionary passion. In 1958, Father Giussani spoke to the leadership of the Italian youth of Catholic Action, experiencing the rising challenges of engaging with the youth. He presents to them a simple either or. I quote, "Either the reason for which we act, the ideal, is not valid, or the way in which we carry it out, the method, is wrong. Let's exclude the first hypothesis, that of considering the Christian ideal as insufficient. Let's instead focus on the second, that is, let's try to identify the conditions in which the method we deploy becomes effective," end quote. Many years later, in 1992, he will go back to this same idea, but in a more drastic and radical manner. I quote, this is strong. "In my opinion, for the past 100 years, we, as Christians, as Christian people, have failed on this very point, that of the method of communication. It is the method we use that is wrong. The method we use to hand down our faith. That is, we can communicate our faith, the evidence that the Christian experience has for us. We can communicate our good news, the mystery of God is among us, without following the method that this truth implies," end quote. What is this method then? In order to answer this question, we must not take for granted the nature of Christianity. What is Christianity? It is the event of God made flesh, man, a fully human presence. The definition of Christianity as an event is, we could say, the hallmark of Giussani's thought, his fundamental intuition. Christianity is a fact, an event, an objective fact, and even if the whole world did not believe in it, it still would not be able to eliminate it. The word event, I quote, identifies the method chosen and used by God to save man. God became man in the womb of a young girl called Mary. The way in which God has entered into a relationship with us to save us is an event, not a thought or a religious sentiment or feeling. It is a fact that took place in history. God entered the history of man as a man. They could meet Jesus, listen to him, follow him. They could argue, react, or adhere to what he said in the town squares, and he could answer and correct them. Something distinctively objective, educated man's subjectivity. Struck the hearts, but was a reality outside of the self. An entirely human presence, in fact, essentially implies the method of the encounter, which has an exterior connotation just as decisive as the interior one. Now, all we have said certainly happened to us who met Jesus. But what about now? after 2,000 years. How can this holy human presence be encountered by the man of today, 2,000 years later? The cracks of the method to which I alluded earlier, for 100 years as Christians we have failed on this point, focuses on the response to this question. Giussani refers in this regard to the gospel accounts. More and more people wanted to meet Jesus, to listen to him, to be healed by him, but he could not go everywhere. So, in villages he could not reach, he sent his men 2 by 2, and they returned enthusiastic, saying, "Master, what do you do? We have also done. The miracles you perform, we have also performed. The people listen to us too." Thus, observes Giussani, even when Jesus was at the height of his activity, the event he was took on a form that was not merely his external physical appearance, but was also that of those who believed in him. They were sent by him to convey his words, his message, to reproduce his prodigious act, to bring the salvation that his person was. St. Paul sensed this when, thrown from his horse, he heard saying to him, "Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me?" He did not even know Christ, and yet he was persecuting people who believed in him. Here emerges the problem of the method. Christ remained present in history and will be present until the end of the centuries through the unity of those he seizes and brings within his personality. His presence is visible, tangible, hearable, like the unity of the believers in him, which historically also has a name, church. Communicating the Christian message, the mystery of God is among us, while respecting the method that this truth implies, means recognizing that, I quote, "the method to reach Jesus Christ today, so as to verify whether his great claim is real, whether he is God or not, is an encounter. It is to come across a reality made up of those who believe in him." End quote. Indeed, the presence of Christ in history, the visible appearance, visibly abides in the unity of the believers, which is the incomparable form of his presence. Therefore, just as back then those who followed him became Christian and changed, so today a Christian is he who changes as a person by following this unity to which Christ gave a sign of absolute objectivity, the Bishop of Rome. What leads us to God is not our thoughts or feeling, but following a presence. All good? Second point. When Giussani begins to engage with the youth, he denounces a way of proposing Christianity that does not remain faithful to these original features of the announcement, to the method chosen by God to save men, the method of the event, therefore of the presence and the encounter, of following and verifying. Here is where the reduction takes place. Christianity is not presented and communicated according to its nature, that of a present event, an event that happened 2,000 years ago and persists in history precisely as an event, as a fully human fact that happens and surprises us now, where we live, and has the face of the community that was born from Christ and has reached us, the church. The church is his body, the reality of his presence today, made up of flesh and blood people, guided as a guarantee by a living person, the Bishop of Rome. Precisely the renewed proposal, clear and decisive, of this essential core of Christianity becomes, in Giussani, a method for the education to faith. It becomes pedagogical brilliance, an art of steps. Indeed, if Christianity is proposed in its originality, the journey of the apostles with Jesus is not just an experience of the past, but an experience possible in the present. It is our own experience with the same pedagogy, the same steps. Starting from the encounter with a person or a group, the Christian proposal appears to us as a community that invites us to live a life. Come and see. That is, follow me and you will see. It calls for a willingness to apply ourselves that implies throwing our entire life into the community of the church and seeing the life of the church community as our own life. Then we see. Then we understand what the church is for us. It is a true verification carried out. If, on the other hand, the original elements of the announcement are not respected, if Christianity is not understood in accordance with its originality and its factual density, an inevitable discontinuity arises between what the apostle experienced with Jesus and what we can experience today of Christianity. One can speak of encounter, presence, discipleship, following, affection, experience, but not in the same fully human sense that all these had for the first ones who were with him. Such expressions end up becoming mere metaphors or carrying a merely inner and subjective meaning. The church is then misunderstood in its sacramental and ontological value and reduced to an purely sociological phenomenon. When the method of Christ's permanence in history is not recognized and taken up as the starting point of the journey, the pedagogy of faith can no longer have the same meaning it had at the beginning. It fatally transforms into an invitation to adhere to certain values and rules on one hand, and to doctrinal learning on the other, with the respective risks of moralism and abstraction. What dominates then is not a presence to follow, a life to engage in and to trust, but the solitary realization of an asceticism and the effort of one's own intelligence. This is the scenario Giussani faced at the beginning of disengagement with young people, and which also presents itself today in so many educational frameworks that may well be religious, but are individualistic, inward-looking, or coldly rationalistic. The result is that rupture, the gap between faith and life, and therefore that lack of personal conviction, which Giussani noted in the 1950s, and which led him to abandon the beloved study of theology, to throw himself headlong into high school teaching and bring there what had been given to him. At the root of Giussani's educational proposal and its effectiveness is therefore the recognized fact of Christ contemporary to man, that is, the conception of Christianity not just as an event, but as a present event. From here, the educational-oriented posture of the movement he initiated draws all its guidance and directives. Third point. We are here. Since the encounter with the Christian fact is a fully human experience, an education to faith cannot be alien to an authentic education to what is human. On the contrary, it maximizes the pedagogical genius of nature, as Giussani calls it. Therefore, in 1961, in front of a group of theologians, he emphasizes, we must return to the most evident rules of nature to educate men. The method that God uses for the growth of child's personality and for the growth of faith is the same. In proposing the Christian fact in its wholeness, Giussani aims at an educational revolution. What matters to us is to change education as such. Otherwise, we will make a big effort for almost nothing. Giussani reflects repeatedly on an education that tries to be based on respecting the original factors. Many of these reflections are collected in The Risk of Education, his most well-known pedagogical work. For Giussani, educating, in most general sense, means introducing an individual to total reality, promoting both the complete development of all of his structures and the affirmation of all of the possibilities of active connection between those structures and reality. With this aim in mind, Giussani outlines 4 fundamental cores of the educational dynamics, focusing his attention on the phase of adolescence of the young people he deals with in school. He considers it absolutely crucial and normally underestimated. 4 factors, and now A, so the first, A. Loyalty to tradition. If we call tradition the cultural horizon and value system in which every human being is born, we must say that the first guideline is to loyally adhere to this tradition. This tradition serves as a sort of explanatory hypothesis of reality for the young person. In the first stage of education, infancy and youth, there is no problem of adherence to tradition. The individual can only absorb the complex of meanings and values of the community in which he grows up. participating above all in family life and in the network of relationship he is part of. At the start of adolescence, however, things change. From absorption, one must move on to conscious and responsible assumption to the tradition. Here, the educational drama opens up, and Giussani intends to provide its key principles. It is by no means obvious that parents and educators propose to the adolescent a loyal adherence to tradition as the path through which he or she can become creative and critical, can develop a position of his/her own. Acting in this direction requires, in fact, a conscious adherence on the part of the educators themselves, parents, teachers, and so on, to the tradition they transmit, and at the same time, the awareness of how that loyal assumption of the traditional data is necessary for the balanced development of the freedom and personality of the young person. The mere proposal to children first and to young people later of a hypothesis of global meaning is often perceived by parents as an undue intrusion, as a subjugation of their freedom. The widely dominant culture of today preaches a very early autonomy of children and adolescents, a drastic anticipation of their freedom of choice. Think, for example, of gender issues nowadays. Giussani's objection is that such a conception does not respect the structures and times of human growth and gives rise to results perfectly opposed to those theoretically pursued. The alleged autonomy turns into self-alienation to presume freedom of judgment and choice into an even more defenseless objection to the conditioning of the social and cultural environment, to trends and to imperatives of consumerism with heavy consequences on the personality information. A feeling of being lost, insecurity, anxiety, depression, isolation, lack of desire, and commitment. A true freedom of judgment and a true freedom of choice require an intense development of the hypothesis that is offered by a history or tradition. This implies, first of all, that parents do not shirk their task, do not fear to propose those meanings and ideals in which they recognize themselves, or that they at least desire for their children, and are therefore attentive to the choice of collaborators in their educational endeavor, so that they are in continuity with such meanings and ideals. B. The encounter with an authority. This point is very nice. The points of tradition that are most aware are the people who are ultimately responsible for an adolescent's education. They are the place of the hypothesis for the adolescent. This is the authentic idea of authority of Giussani. What makes one grow, in Latin, auctoritas. The proposal of a tradition of a global hypothesis of meaning finds its essentially mobilizing moment in authority. It is important to note that Giussani's concept of authority has nothing to do with illiberal authority, with pedagogical authoritarianism, with a suppression of freedom, or with forced indoctrination. It is exactly the opposite. Giussani uses the expression authoritative presence. Is very difficult for me. Authoritative presence. The experience of authority is the encounter with a person in whom the richness of tradition becomes reality in an exemplary fashion. It communicates itself in a lively way and conscious of itself, of its own reasons. In authority, the truth of a hypothesis of meaning is shown, that is, its correspondence to our ultimate needs and evidences, and its ability to illuminate circumstances, to face problems and situations is shown. For this reason, it fascinates us, sparks wonder, attraction, and respect, and we are naturally inclined to follow it. Only authority educates the one who is to be educated. Education is the encounter with an authority, and that's all, says Giussani. This is Giussani's word. In the encounter with authority, the ultimate and unavoidable dynamic of any method of education comes more explicitly into light, the rule of following. To advance towards the fullness of our personality is only truly possible in the concrete gesture of leaving behind our own limits to adhere passionately to the hypothesis of total meaning that authority implies. The Christian community values and takes to the limit the natural rule of education, of following an authority. Encounters with authority, in the sense described, mark one's life, accompany one's life. They are the decisive element of every human existence. Of course, both those who exercise authority and those who follow it can be responsible for mortifying and sometimes terrifying reductions. But the poor implementation of authority does not overshadow the need for its dynamic, which as such cannot be replaced by any surrogate. We need to follow authentic, authoritative presences. This is the path of self-appropriation to the construction of one's own personality. It is a path always yet to be traveled, well beyond adolescence. I quote, "It is a rule, a universal law since man exists. The person rediscovers itself in a living encounter, that is, in a presence he comes across and that releases an attraction that is in a presence that is a provocation for ourselves, and that invites us to follow it. C, the verification. In order to adequately respond to the educational needs of adolescents, it is not enough to propose a meaning of the words in clear terms, nor it is enough for the person making the proposal to have a certain intensity of real authority. Rather, one must cultivate a personal engagement on the part of the young person with his or her own origin. They must verify what tradition has offered them, and this may only be done on their own initiative and no one else's. Therefore, it is not enough, as is often said, to clarify ideas or to propose content and reasons. It is necessary to tirelessly awaken in the young person the commitment to the subjecting the proposal to personal testing, so that they may discover its existential validity or, conversely, its insufficiency. This is the real problem of education, to provoke the commitment of energy and action necessary to verify the hypothesis. Without verification, in fact, tradition cannot become conviction, nor can it be consciously rejected in its point of partiality and inadequacy. Perhaps it is precisely in the US that this aspect of Giussani's pedagogy can be more immediately understood and felt in its importance. Giussani surprisingly uses the language of verification and experimental validation. Here comes to the forefront the heritage, entirely re-elaborated, of William James' pragmatism, which had greatly influenced American Protestantism, the subject of Giussani's academic studies. He was well aware of the disruptive force of this concept, which no one in the Catholic sphere was using. But what does it mean existentially to verify? It means to put to the test what is being communicated to us, thus committing to address all the issues that life's development exposes, starting from the proposal of meaning received from and seen in the authoritative presence. Thus we discover whether and to what extent that the hypothesis proves to be vitally linked with all our needs and projects, becomes the keystone for all other encounters, resolving light on our experiences. It is not enough for a young person to be offered a value or an ideal horizon. It is necessary for them to make themselves present to the ideal value. By doing it, verifying it, truth needs to be done, experienced, verified in a vital and affective engagement, in an adhering. The educator, for his part, must help the young person to experience the truth, that is, the correspondence between the real and his consciousness, between the proposal and the demands of life. Giussani interprets the urgency of verification and existential validation presented in American Protestantism in the light of the Thomistic definition of truth, and vice versa. The correspondence takes on the meaning of verification. To verify means to experience the correspondence or non-correspondence of what is being proposed with our own life, with own self-awareness as it implies original needs and evidences. Without verification, there is no education. Conviction does not mature, and thus a complete personality is not being formed. Even in religious education, Giussani notices the presence of a pedagogical rationalism, according to which all that is needed is a clear exposition of formulas. But, he emphasizes, if for the 4 or 5 years after young people reach the age of 14, they are not persistently and systematically helped to see the connection between the given, the tradition, and life, then their new experiences will lay the groundwork for them to adopt one of the 3 attitudes that are enemies of Christianity. Indifference, due to the abstractness in which what has been transmitted to him remains. Traditionalism, that is a defensive entrenchment aimed at avoiding new challenges which could make him waver. Hostility towards a God who, not showing himself in connection with life, hinders it. Within the bold concept of verification lies, as a corollary, the no less bold one of criticism, from the Greek krino, to discern. True education must be education to criticism, Giussani affirms. That is, to the comparison between the proposal and the heart, in order to account for what has been offered and consciously grasp its truth. Following the authoritative presence that communicates to them the richness of the past and offers them reasons in support of it, the youth, from within an existential commitment, have to take this past and these reasons and lift them before their eyes, compare them with their own heart, and say, it's true, or it's not true, or I doubt it. Thus, with the support of a companionship, they can say yes or no. In doing so, they acquire their features as a person. Giussani's accusation is significant in this regard. We have been too afraid of this criticism. Truly, we have. And those who are not too afraid have applied it without knowing what it was, and have failed to apply it well. Criticism has been reduced to negativity. Instead, it is primarily the expression of the human genius that is in all of us, a genius that trains to discover being, to discover values. Giussani underlines some conditions of verification. Firstly, the relevance to the environment. The adolescent must be helped to seriously grapple with something in their environment in keeping with an ideal, because it is from there that the most challenging provocation and promptings come, in relation to which the validity of the received hypothesis of meaning will also become clearer. Secondly, the communal dimension for criticism and verification not to become trivial or a sort of wishful thinking pre-established from the start, the support of a place, of a community is necessary. Without the density of companionship, not only the young man, but the grown one too, is too easily at the mercy of reactivity. And reactivity, in addition to being endogenous, is helpfully stimulated by the social context. There is nothing more obstructive for an effective personalization of the proposal than an individualistic approach to education. Real dependence upon a total meaning of things demands, as a matter of psychology, that young people not carry out their verification in the environment in a solitary and therefore independent or abstract way. An adolescent needs to live out his or her way of facing all of reality in a communal way. To the extent that education is a permanent necessity of existence, the community does not cease, even after adolescence, to constitute a fundamental condition for verification, understood as the work of life. Communal life is like to the soil on which the plant of freedom can bear mature fruit. This holds from the day of our birth to that of our death. Fifth point. 5 or fifth point. Education, the fundamental issue for human development. Few have felt the urgency of education as strongly as Giussani did. In a meeting with university students, he observes, everything that is human is the fruit of an education. What leads to such a strong statement? Giussani quotes several times a work by André Gide, the Pastoral Symphony, which contains the story of Gertrude, a young girl who survived in a state of semi-neglect, precisely to emphasize that, I quote, man develops through a relationship, through contact with another, as much as the other is necessary for man to exist, so the other is necessary for man to realize himself, to discover his true self, to become more and more himself. We do not become ourselves without the other. Our process of growth depends on the presence and initiative of the other, of others, that is, in a word, from an education that begins from the very first moment, when we are still in our mother's womb. The unfolding of what is human takes place only where there is education. Education is the key of the humanization of life, and therefore it is the fundamental problem for the present and future of a society, the cornerstone of a civilization. And at the same time, the mutual statement is true. There is education only where there is already our original humanity, our humanity has a dual status. It is both a prerequisite and a result, an original native structure and a historical realization, a condition and an outcome. The fact that what is human is not only the origin but also the result explains the profound and compelling meaning of education and gives reason for its necessity. The disposition of an individual, of a community, a society, or a civilization is decided precisely in the space that goes from the origin to the outcome. The structural necessity of education is inscribed in the tension between our humanity as a presupposition and our humanity as a result. A little more and I finish. The art, that complex of needs and evidences with which we are originally endowed, as well as reason, freedom, affectivity, that is, these fundamental capacities of our being do not realize themselves as the result of an evolutionary spontaneity, but of an education. Our original humanities is realized, as Giussani said, only in the encounter and by contact with another, with others in a community. In our human experience, in addition to a factor that we can call structural or ontological, there is always deeply intertwined with it a historical factor made up of the provocations in which we grow and that touch us, and the whiteness we find before us. It is not indifferent then whether we come into contact with this or that provocation, whether there is this or that type of encounter at the basis of the constitution of our human personality. It is the latter factor that actually reveals and activates the former. In fact, our original human experience does not exist actively, says Giussani, if not within the form of a provocation. It does not exist if it does not act. Our original awareness does not act but within the form of a provocation, that is, within a modality in which it is elicited. The provocation is like a form that makes it act. The human vocation is therefore activate in relation to the provocations we receive, to the encounters, to the testimonies, to the lifestyles with which we come into contact. In this perspective, Giussani reiterates the scope of Christianity. It is the event of Christ. It is the historical encounter with Christ. This is the form that reveals fully what is human in us, unveils it in all its potential, as the event of Christ corresponds to what is human in us, precisely because it corresponds to it, it activates it to the maximum degree. It brings it to the surface in its ultimate depth. The encounter with its incarnate origin and ultimate destination, the event of Christ as a reality present here and now, reveals our human structure in its truth, frees within us what is original, and expands its experience by opening its awareness up beyond the imagination we have already developed. It is not merely doctrinal content, but a historical experience to be enjoyed today in the existential, human, and concrete encounter with the faith that the presence of Christ assumes where we live. Only the event of an encounter clarifies and intensifies human life like no other can open us up again and again to a vital discovery of Christianity, or can push us to reconsider it in every context, at every latitude. Giussani was convinced of this, and out of the desire to be an instrument of such an experience, he asked to leave his theological career and to teach religion in high school. We are infinitely grateful that he did. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here today. That remain, quelli che rimangono. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here today, and our lives wouldn't be the same. Thank you for your attention. I have challenged you with my Italian accent, but I'm glad to have had the opportunity to share with you these things that are my life's passion.